Congratulations on making it to the end of the MySQL section of the Complete Web Developer course. You've covered a huge amount and we've been working steadily towards creating our own web app with a completely functional login system. And that's what we're going to be doing in this challenge. So I've split it into two parts, and I'm first going to show you the final output of what we're going to be making, and then I'll show you what we're aiming for in this first video. So obviously we've got a nice looking Bootstrap styled page, and we can switch between sign up and login by clicking the link at the bottom there. If we try and sign up without a password or something like that, we get nice error messages. And once we do sign up, I'll just use a random email address, we are treated to a lovely big text area where the user can enter their deepest thoughts, and they are updated in the database as soon as the user has typed them. So they don't even need to click a save button. And then of course the user can log out and come back to the home page. So that's what we're going to be producing. It's pretty cool, but what we're after in this first video is something a lot less pretty, but not necessarily a lot less functional. So what I want to do here is kind of abstract the login system. So we've got a sign up form and a login form, both of which have an option to stay logged in, which is going to create a cookie to keep the user logged in permanently, even if they shut down the browser. And this has got all of the same validation built in, but when you sign up or log in successfully, it just logs you into a page that says you are logged in and gives them the option to log out. So the reason I've separated it is because this will give you a robust and flexible login system that you could use for pretty much any site that required user sign up. So you've got all the skills to do this yourself. I hope it goes well. Go for it. All right then, here goes. I'm going to begin by making the HTML sign-up form, and this is going to be pretty similar to the form that we made a few videos ago, with the exception that we're also going to allow the user to stay logged in using a cookie. So here goes. We're going to have a form, and I'm going to stick with post and then I'm going to have an input with a type of email. It's going to have a name of email as well, and a placeholder of your email. Then we'll have similar for the password. So type of password, name equals password, and placeholder. Let's just have password. And then we're going to have a checkbox with a name of stay logged in and a value of 1. And finally, we're going to have an input with a type of submit and a value of sign up. All right, let's take a look. Whoop, that's fine, except don't know what I'm doing with my checkbox. Should have been an input with a type of checkbox. Let's just try that again. Great. Obviously, we'll add the labels for these later on. But for now, let's just do a quick test. Sign up, so it seems to be submitting the form well. And then let's just add some PHP to test first off if there is a post variable. So if array key exists, and one way around looking for the email or password is to actually look for the submit, which if they click on that button to submit the form, which they have to submit the form, there's definitely going to be a submit variable in there. So we could actually look for array key exists and look for the submit key within the post array. And if that does exist, for now we'll just display the post values. So let's just fill those in again. And there we go. So we've got email, we've got password, stay logged in, and submit. Excellent. So let's do some validation. We'll have an error variable, which is initially empty, and then if they haven't entered an email address, we'll append to the error an email address is required. And we'll do the same for password. And I'm not going to do any email validation to check that it's a valid email, or I'm not going to have multiple password fields to check against each other as well. Just for simplicity, we've done those before and you can add those if you like. So then we'll say if there is an error, i.e. the error string is not empty, then we'll say something like error equals there were errors in your form and then we'll have the specific error messages. And I'll just pop a line break again at the end of each of those. Not that it's really needed at the end of the password, but we might want to add further ones on and it's not going to break anything. So then down here, as we've seen before, we'll have a div with an ID of error and we'll echo the error message there, which will obviously be blank if there isn't one. Okay, so let's try putting just an email address in. Oh, it does have to be valid. Oh, yep, that's very strange of me. I changed error to password for some reason. Try that again. Excellent. There are errors in your form, a password is required. And similarly, if I put a password in, then we get an email address error. If I put an email address in and a password, then we don't get any errors. Brilliant. All right, so if there isn't an error, our next step is to see if that email address is taken. And for that, we'll need access to our database. So I've got my control panel up and ready to go here. I'm going to create a new database because we're doing everything from scratch. So I'm clicking on MySQL databases and I'm going to call it secret DI. And notice that you're limited to 9 characters here. So I'm just going to leave it as that. If you're using a different system, you may be able to have a longer name, but it doesn't really require one, so that will work fine. And then we'll generate a password and create the database. Great. So then let's scroll down to get the details. There we go. That's what we're going to need to connect. But first off, let's jump into phpMyAdmin and create the data structure. So I'd always recommend using something like phpMyAdmin to manage your database. So when you're actually creating tables or columns, then do that in a nice interface like this, and then use your code to just add and edit and search items within your database as necessary. So we'll just call it users again. And I'm going to have 5 columns. I never know quite how many columns I'm going to need, but 5 seems reasonable. And if you don't use them all, then that's fine anyway. So I'm going to start as always with an ID. That's an integer, and it's going to auto increment, and it's going to be a primary key. Then I'm going to have the email address. I'm going to have my password, and I'm going to have my diary. So that's going to be the actual content of the diary, which we obviously won't need until later on, but we'll put it in now anyway. And those two will be text. I think that's all we'll need. We'll find out later on. Okay, so now if we look at that, obviously there's no users in there as yet. So now it's time to connect to our database from our script. So we'll do that here. So we'll have a link, which is going to be MySQL connect. And we're on the same server as our database server, so I can use localhost. If we weren't, I would have to use that IP address there. Then we have the username. For our database. Then we're going to have the password, but while I've got it in my clipboard, remember on Eco Web Hosting, the database name is the same as the username. So I'm going to paste that in there as well. And then we can grab the password and put that in there too. Then we'll do our check to see if there is a MySQL connect error. And if there is, then we'll end the script and we'll just put a database connection error. All right, with any luck though, we'll be connected to the database. And then when we're here, we can do our check to see if there is a user with the email address that our new user has entered. So let's set up a query. It's going to be select ID from users, where email is equal to, and then we're going to use MySQL real escape string, and then the post email variable, so that you'll remember escapes any strange characters and any naughtiness that the user might be using to access our system. And I'll pop a limit on there. Not that it really matters, but I like to have a limit unless it's really not necessary. Then we'll run the query. So result is MySQL query using the link and the query. And using link there just has reminded me that I've forgotten to put it in there for the MySQL real escape string as well. Then I'm going to check MySQL num rows, as we saw before, from the result. And I want to see if that is bigger than 0. And if it is, we'll echo that email address is taken. Or in fact, let's not echo it. Let's set our error variable equal to it, and then it will be echoed down there. And if that's not the case, we actually want to sign the user up. So let's run our query. This is going to be insert into users, and we're inserting two fields, email and password, and the values for those fields are going to be the email address, which we've already got escaped right there, and also the password, which remember we're going to hash, but I want to hash it with the ID of the user in the database, and we don't know what that is yet. So I'm going to very temporarily store the password unhashed, and then we'll immediately update it. Okay, and then we'll run that query. And just before we do the updating the password bit, I'm just going to run this because I've written a lot of code there, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some errors in it. So let's have a look while we're still working. Ah, yes. I often forget my link. And actually, let's add a check to see if that's worked. I think I'll check specifically if it hasn't worked. Then we'll add an error. Could not sign you up. Please try again later. And for now, let's have a quick echo sign up. Successful. So that's what we want to see. Let's have a look. All right, we've got something that looks very promising there. Let's have a look in the database. Hurrah! We have our new user. Fabulous. So now then, if the user tries to sign up again with those details, it should say that email address is taken. So the next thing to do then is update the password to a properly hashed password. And to do that, we'll need the ID of the inserted row, which we could get by doing a query from it. But there's actually a really nice way of getting that ID, and that is using MySQL insert ID. And that actually gives us the ID of the most recently inserted element in our database, which is really handy. So that's going to give us what we need. So that means I want to update the password using an MD5 hash involving this. So let's set up our query, and we want to update, I'll just get rid of that for the moment, update users, and we want to set password equal to, and we want to do an MD5 of the posted password. But you'll remember we want to salt that with an MD5 of the MySQL insert ID. So this will take the MySQL insert ID, so the ID of the row that we've just created. It will MD5 it. It will then append that to the password that they've put in. It'll MD5 that, and then it will set that to be the password for our user. And we want to set that to be the case where the ID is equal to, and again, we want MySQL insert ID. We could stop there, but I'm going to pop a limit 1 on the end, just in case something goes horribly wrong. All right. Then once again, we'll run the query. So link and query. And then that should encode the password for us. So let's have a new user at gmail.com with some password, and then we'll sign them up. Aha, we've got a good warning there. The MySQL insert ID does require the link variable to go in there. So let's have another new user at Gmail with a very simple password. Okay, we've got sign up successful. That's looking good. Let's now have a look at our database, and we should find, there we go. So our other new user has a nicely hashed password in there, and let's get rid of these unsecure ones because they're dirtying our database as it stands. We don't want that. All right. So now we're going to set up the sessions and, if requested, the cookie. So let's start by adding session start to the beginning of our script. And then we'll set the session ID to be equal to, again, MySQL insert ID. So the ID of our new user. And finally, we'll check to see if they have requested to stay logged in. And that will be the case if stay logged in is equal to 1. And if it is, then we'll set a cookie as well. So that's going to be ID. It's going to have a value of MySQL insert ID link and a time of the current time plus 1 minute, then an hour, 24, and why not go for the whole hog, 365. So that will really keep them logged in for a long time. All right, so now we've set the session and the cookie, we're going to do a redirect. So I'm just going to nip back to FireFTP and create a new file. And this is going to be logged in page.php. We're only going to have one logged in page, so I can just call it that, but you're going to probably want to be a little bit more descriptive with your file names. So logged in page, we're then going to edit. And this is going to be pretty simple. So we're going to start our session. And we're going to check to see if there's a cookie. So I'll do it using array key exists. And the key that we're looking for is ID. And we're looking for it in the cookie array. And if that's the case, then we'll set the session ID equal to the cookie ID. So that's a pretty simple way to have a session and cookie set up in one go. So if the user has a cookie, then we update the session to equal it, and then we can refer to the session everywhere else. And essentially we just recreate the session every time that we need to. And then we'll check to see if there's a session. So again, if array key exists, and this time we're looking for the same key, but we're looking in the session array. So if that's the case, we'll echo logged in, and we'll give them a link to log out. And the way I'm going to do this is to link back to index.php, but with a flag saying logout is equal to 1. So that's a get variable, which essentially says log me out. And we'll deal with that back in index.php. So that will be our logout link. And we'll have a paragraph there as well. Okay, so that's if they are logged in. If they're not logged in, I'm just going to redirect them back to the home page. And we do that with a header of location index.php. Okay. So let's check first off that the redirect works when they're logged out. So if we run to logged in page.php, it should, there we go, link us straight back to index.php, which has acquired a warning. We'll deal with that in a minute. And then hopefully, if we're logged in when we get to that page, it will show us the logged in and then give us the logged out link. So let's save that and close that down for now. I use just Command W or Control W on Windows to close that. And let's have a quick look at this error. So we want to, yes, as we saw before, we want to create the error variable before we check for a post variable. Okay. So instead of saying sign up successful, we now want to link them or redirect them to the logged in page. Wonderful. So let's sign up rob@rob.com and we'll try a permanent sign up, see how that goes. There we go. So we've redirected and it clearly knows that we're logged in because it's displaying the logged in message. So let's click log out. And excellent, that links us back to the home page with logout is equal to 1. So all that remains for that bit is to log the user out. And we'll do this right here. So if array key exists, and then we're looking for the logout key. Just going to check that. Yep. The logout key within the get array. And if that exists, then we want to log the user out. So we'll unset the session. We'll set the cookie into the past. So time minus 60 times 60. And I like to just set the cookie to an empty string just in case it gets accessed later on. Not that it should. Remember, it takes an extra refresh for the cookie variable to actually be destroyed. And then we'll add in here that if they're not logging out, we'll have a check to see if they are logged in, because we don't want them seeing the login form if they're already logged in. So if array key exists ID session, or array key exists ID cookie, then we'll redirect them to the logged in page. All right, so if we sign up now, with a cookie, then we redirect over to the logged in page. If we attempt to go back to the home page, then it just redirects us back to the logged in page. But if we log out, then we're now properly logged out and it doesn't do the redirect. Brilliant. So this is now set up more or less as we want. The one thing that we're missing is a login form. So let's add that down here. So it's going to look very much like the sign up form, and it's going to behave very much like it as well. The difference is we're going to have a login value instead of sign up. There we go. Now, one thing we're going to need to do up here when we're doing our post is to know whether we're attempting to sign the user up or log them in. Now, one way we could do it is to look at the value of the submit variable, but that's not very neat because we might want to change the word sign up to register or something like that, and we don't want to have to update our code to take account of a change in the look of the website. So the way I'm going to work with that is to have a hidden variable, which is just an input that doesn't display on the HTML at all, but we can use it in our code. So that's going to have a name of sign up and a value of 1. And then down here, we're going to have exactly the same thing, but sign up is going to have a value of 0 because we're logging in. Okay, so let's see what we need to change for logging in then. We still want to do the database connection, obviously. We still want to check to see if there's an email. We still want to check if there's a password. So we can leave those parts in. But this part here is going to be different. So I'm going to split this all up. So we're now checking to see if post sign up, just make sure I've spelled that right, yep, is equal to 1, then we're going to do all of this sign up stuff. And just make that a bit bigger so we can see what's going on. And you can see we've got a handy green marker there. So that's the end of the sign up section. So I'm going to put that there and else. And for now, I'll just put logging in because I want to check that I've done that correctly. So that should do all of this if it's a sign up, and if not, we'll get a message saying logging in. Okay, I think that's probably because I've put this in the wrong place. I think it should probably be there. 1 curly brackets down. There we go, easily done. So let's first off just check that the form validation is working on the login. Excellent, yep, that's looking promising. Great. And then let's do a full login. Great. So it's going to the right bit of the script. And let's just make sure that we've got the variables that we need. I'll just get last pass out the way. Let's resubmit that. Great. So we've got our email and we've got our password. So we're going to need to do a query to see if the user's got their username and password correct. So let's set up a query. So we want to select ID from our users table where, and we want email to be equal to MySQL I real escape string. Don't forget the link and the posted email. And that's it for now. Note we can't check the password at this point because we don't know the ID of the user, and therefore we don't know the salt to our password hashing. So we need to get the email, check the email first, and then let's get the query. Using link and query. And then we'll set row equal to MySQL fetch array of the result. And then we're checking to see if the array key exists, and that's the ID field in the row array. And if it does, we'll create a variable called hashed password, which is going to be MD5. And then we're going to MD5 the row ID. Combine that with the password that the user has entered, and that will be our entered hash password. And in fact, I'm going to change that to a select star, select everything, because then we can just check if hashed password is equal to the saved password in the database. So if it is, then we want to set the session ID to the row ID. And we also want to set the cookie if necessary and redirect. Now, I probably should put that in a separate function because I'm using it twice, but I'm going to be a bit lazy here. We've got a lot of new stuff, and I think it's probably slightly simpler to just have this code twice for now. So if stayed login is equal to 1, then we'll set the ID of the cookie not to MySQL insert ID, but the row ID. And then we'll do the redirect. All right, so there was quite a lot of new stuff there. Let's hope I haven't broken anything. Nope, the script still works at least. So let's sign up first. So we'll have asdf@asdf.com and a password of asdf. Sign up, that still works, great. Then we'll log out and then we'll log in with the same details. Excellent. So that login has worked. Let's just make sure that if we log in with an incorrect email address, for example, that should not work. Well, it hasn't worked, which is good, but we do have a warning. So let's just fix that. Line 95, let's have a look. Okay. So because the row array doesn't exist, checking for a key within it doesn't really make sense. So let's use if is set instead, and that will check to see if the row array exists at all. And that then should avoid that message, which it does. But that has reminded me that we have to add an error message in to say if it doesn't, we'll set the error to that email/password combination could not be found. And don't forget the semicolon. Let's resubmit. Excellent. And if we get the email address right, but the password wrong, then, okay, it doesn't log us in, which is good, but we don't have an error message. So that should go there. And again, I don't quite like having that message twice. But I think putting in the code to combine it into one is not quite worth it, and will just make this rather unnecessarily more complicated than it needs to be. So let's just check. We now have our error message. Fantastic. So that's as far as I'm going to go in this video. What you now have here is a solid and secure sign-in system that you can use on any website. There's nothing specific to Secret Diary other than the database name. And that, of course, you would change anyway. So it's a really good general purpose bit of code, and it forms a solid basis for our Secret Diary web app as well. All right, so we'll stop there, but we'll carry straight on with our Secret Diary web app in the next video. Actually, just before we move on, there is one thing that I want to clarify here, and one issue that we've got with the setup as it stands, and that is if we log ourselves in. So let's just create a new account and then log out. That all works fine. But if we then go back to index.php without the logout get variable, then it actually still thinks we're logged in. And that's because of the delay of unsetting the session and setting the cookie backwards as well. So the array key exists even though the actual variable itself doesn't have a value, or its value is 0. So I'm going to fix that by adding an extra couple of bits to the if statement, because what I want to avoid doing is just, if I get rid of that temporarily, I want to avoid doing that, because even though that will work, it will give me a PHP warning, and I want to avoid the warnings, because if that doesn't exist, then I'm assuming that it exists by doing this, by doing the check on it. So what I'm going to do is check for both the array key existing and the ID actually having a value, or the cookie existing and the cookie having a value. And that gets around the problem, because if the array key for the session variable doesn't exist, then it won't do the check on session ID, so we won't get an error. And similarly for the cookie, if the array key doesn't exist, it won't do the check on the cookie itself. So that avoids the false redirect problem, but without giving us a PHP warning. So now you can see we're not being redirected. All right, on with the Secret Diary.